People who knew someone who died in a freak accident. What happened? I used to work for a septic company. A guy who drove one of the big septic trucks that sucked out underground septic tanks at people's houses had to get on his hands and knees and reach into the tank because the lid had fallen in. He lost his balance and fell head first in. His shoulders got wedged in the opening and he drowned upside down in human waste. I don't think I've ever heard of a worse way to go. The homeowner found him after about an hour. This happened a long time ago, but a neighbor was trying to weld a gas tank and didn't realize that he should have filled it with water beforehand. The tank exploded and killed him. A family friend bumped his head, walked about 15 feet across his backyard, sat at his picnic table and died. Autopsy showed no head trauma, but he broke his neck when he hit his head. They figured the walk across the yard caused something to shift enough to do fatal damage to his spinal cord. Former coworker of mine was gored by a bison while on a trail run. Ironically, he often posted on message boards for the park to be aware of wild animals while there, and in one post he said there are too many people with headphones on, or trying to get too close to the bison to take selfies. He was normally very careful apparently. A guy I knew was setting up a rope swing over a lake for his kids and their friends, which he had done many times before. He always would take a practice swing himself before he would let the kids go. His hand slipped off the rope and he fell before he was over the lake. He hit his head on a rock and died in front of the kids. When I was a 13-year-old boy, I witnessed my grandfather die. He was less than 15 feet away from me when he was decapitated by shrapnel from a broken piece of heavy farm equipment. I'm 50 years old and still struggle with that moment in time. PTSD can be a real bitch. Lovely girl, I went to HS with got a scholarship to a prestigious university, being one of the very few students from my shitty school to make it to college or uni. 2 weeks into term her roommate found her laying in her bed dead. The heating boiler was faulty and she'd died of carbon monoxide poisoning in her sleep. We'd even thrown a party for her to celebrate her achievement. This was in 1996, and I'm tearing up a bit thinking about this. R.I.P. Sonia. A friend of a friend showed up at his girlfriend's apartment with a head wound. He didn't know how it happened. He also didn't know how he drove over there. She took him to the ER, where he ended up passing away. He had his keys, wallet and phone on him. The only thing we could think of is he might have tripped, fell and hit his head in the wrong spot. A friend of my dad's was overseeing a repaired braided 3/4 cable being spooled from one drum to another, at very high speed and tension. He had his gloved hand loosely on the wire guiding it into position, a big no-no in the industry. A frayed wire came through, snagged his glove and dragged him into the drum, wrapping him into a contorted paste within seconds. I was snowboarding in 1997 in Switzerland with a good friend. He was skiing. I had caught an edge and landed on the back of my head while also twisting my knee badly. I was being looked over by the mountain rescue and first aid. I told my friend he could keep skiing, I would head back to our villa. I ended up going to sleep at around 6 p.m. as I had a hot shower and some Tylenol 3s after dinner. I woke up to see my friend hadn't returned and thought it was odd, but maybe he hooked up with a lady at some bar. Friend never came back from skiing. He was found deep in a crevasse the next afternoon and frozen to death. My neighbor was cleaning his gutters and fell off his roof because he missed his footing when stepping. Fell right on his head. This was a few years back now, but the family moved quickly after even though it had been their house for like 30 years. I can't say I blame them. A friend slipped and fell in the tub. Cracked his head. His roommate found him a half hour later. Died on the way to the hospital. A girl I went to grade school with was crushed under a Smith machine at a local gym. 24-hour gym, so no one was around to help. Had an uncle that lived down at the beach, used to spend a lot of time out on a Bertram fishing boat. Many beers were usually enjoyed during those times. They used to go out into deeper water and jump off the flybridge, the roof part of the boat where there are controls as well as a place to sit. One day he went out with some friends, and they decided to partake in said jumping. Unbeknownst to him, the tide had gone out and they had drifted into shallow water. He dove in head first, hit the bottom, killed him. A friend of mine was riding his four-wheeler out at an off-road park. He kicked up a tree branch that impaled him in the thigh. He bled to death before anyone even knew it happened. A guy I went to high school with was helping his family do some repairs to a silo on their family farm. A section of the silo's roofing gave way, and in he went. Suffocated under thousands of pounds of grain. Girl I grew up with was driving home in college and go into a horrible car accident that gave her brain damage and pretty much removed her jaw from her skull. Tons of surgery, and 3 years later, she walked down the aisle at her wedding. She was in her yard a few months after her wedding and slipped/tripped/felt dizzy and fell, they aren't sure, and hit her head on pavement patio, and her husband found her dead. An old buddy I had known since elementary school died while driving when a chunk of loose gravel was kicked up through his windshield by a passing truck on the freeway. His best friend had been riding in the passenger side and had to steer the car to safety. It was nobody's fault, just a complete freak accident. I've always felt terrible for the friend who had to watch it happen. I think about my friend who died a lot. He was a really cool guy. I still remember playing basketball with him during recess when we were kids. It's strange to think that he never could have known how his life would end or see it coming in any way. That kid I used to play basketball thought he still had an entire life ahead of him. If you live in corn-heavy Midwest areas of America, you're probably familiar with detasseling. Detasseling is a job a lot of smaller towns will let kids do, I think from 13 up, with parental permission. It's very common where I'm from. Essentially, you just walk with a group of other people through cornfields, pulling the tassel off the top to prevent them from germinating and seeding excessively. Anyway, like 2 years after I did it, there was an accident involving 2 high school freshmen stepping into a puddle that an electric irrigator was shorting into. One of them basically died immediately, the other en route. R.I.P. Hannah and Jade. My uncle was mowing grass on an embankment next to a small body of water. The mower unexpectedly slipped down the embankment and overturned on top of him, pinning him under the water. He drowned in a few feet of water that he otherwise could have stood up in. Edit. Lots of folks asking where/when. Not recent. About 13 years ago in the American Southeast. Based on responses, though, maybe not as much of a freak accident as I thought. Seems to happen a lot. Swimming, and one of my buddies was screwing with the great thing over a drain at the bottom. Got his foot stuck and couldn't extricate himself. His brother, cousin, and I nearly drowned trying to free him, so we got to watch him die. Haven't thought about this one in a bit. Teacher in my school lost all 3 kids in a freak traffic accident on the highway. Their car lost a tire, which caused them to swerve into the gas tank of a semi-truck, which exploded, killing 2 of them instantly. The 3rd kid managed to crawl out of the car while he was on fire, and died later in the hospital. The saddest part is that they were all on their way to visit their father in the hospital after his back surgery. A mom went ice skating. Little slip, fell, all everyone saw was her bump her head lightly. Family finished skating. On the ride home, she started speaking gibberish. Dad dropped kids at the grandparents, took mom to the ER. Brain swelling, coma, dead a week later. My uncle was refilling a Zippo lighter while smoking. Somehow it caught fire, he set himself on fire. He was in the bathroom. He tried to reach the shower. The extreme flammable shower curtain caught on fire and he inhaled large amounts of toxic smoke. He died a few days later, mainly from lung issues and not so much from the burns. There was a person at the beach who got impaled by a flying beach umbrella. Horrible situation. Her husband was right beside her and she died within seconds. Childhood friend of mine drowned, his leg got trapped swimming in a relatively shallow river. He went down and just never came back up. It happened to one of the nicest people I ever knew, and it makes me so mad that we lost touch before I found out what happened. My SIL's aunt died of hypothermia. She went for a walk out in the hills in the winter. She knew the trail very well, but got disoriented by a light snowfall and got lost. She got cold and tired, laid down by a rock and died of hypothermia. She was 100 yards from her car. Guy I knew from school recently died from a sinus infection that spread to his brain. He was a primary school teacher and a recent father. Guy I knew was driving a tractor trailer with a stack of pipe on the back. He swerved to avoid an accident after a car cut him off, went into the ditch, and was cut in half.